Thanks, Tiffany, and thanks for having me today. I'm Nina Stracciolini. I'm the lead tech artist at Insomniac Games. I've been with the studio for coming up on 14 years, and I'm very happy to be here with this esteemed panel, some old friends and new. So let's just get started and have everyone introduce yourself. Wyeth, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm Wyeth Johnson. I'm the director of technical art at Epic Games. I've been making games for 23 years. I've been a hiring manager for 15 of those. And for about the last 10 years or so, I've been part of a panel at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco called Killer Portfolio or Portfolio Killer. Which is basically just talking about why a lot of game portfolios have problems and how to fix them, hopefully. So thanks for having me.
And Forrest, do you want to go next?
Yep. Hi, I'm Forrest. I started in games literally last year. I was someone who switched over during the pandemic from filmmaking into games and am now at Lost Boys Interactive as a lighting artist there.
Great, thank you. Brian.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be here, and thanks for having me. Been in the game industry for about 23 years. Worked at EA on Madden and NCAA football, then went to Firaxis for about 13 years to work on XCOM, Marvel Midnight Suns. Through the course of my career, it started out in environment art, went to character art, did a little bit of work there, and then just got into management and just started to manage people and really kind of found my stride there, and then really enjoyed doing that, watching people grow and helping people grow. But I still can't believe I get paid to make video games, but here I am. So a little bit about me.
Great. Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Wells, principal character artist at Blizzard Entertainment. I've had some time in my career over the 23 years at Epic Games, Ubisoft, and one or two startups. I've done some workshops at University of Georgia as well as NYU, as well as contributed to a book called Game Artist, a Career Guide, and it's great to be here.
Great, thank you, everybody. All right, so on to our first question. What are some careers that you can talk about in the game industry? Wyeth, do you want to field this one first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting, but when game art became a job, which ironically wasn't that long ago, it started where it was kind of generalist. People were just good artists, and then they dive into the industry and they kind of pick up wherever they're needed. Maybe they are doing 2D paintings, or maybe they learn a little modeling and create 3D art, rudimentary at that time, 3D art. And of course, you have people who are just traditional painters who are doing conceptualization, generating ideas. Now, we're in 2022 and things are getting a little more granular. And so now you are starting to subdivide that world a little more clearly. And you've got people who still come out of traditional art school as painters or illustrators, and they have the kind of work that they could do doing conceptualization paintings or illustrations, in order to get ideas across. You've got people who are just solely dedicated to painting textures, painting imagery that wraps around three-dimensional shapes to create the 3D models that we see today. 3D modeling itself is a massive skill now in the industry, and you've got people who are traditionally classically trained sculptors who now can stretch those muscles because the digital tools that are used to sculpt 3D art it have really amazing analogs to pushing clay around, which is what people did before all of this. And so, above and beyond the kind of classical art training, which is a big part of the game industry, you now also have really technical jobs, like what Nina does, where you basically have an amazing character, but how do you make them move? You've got to create a digital skeleton and apply it to that character in intelligent ways, and maybe you're simulating things with physics or whatever to make those characters look more believable or act more believably. You've got classically trained animators who can take the skills of motion and timing and apply those to digital objects now. So you've got, okay, I have a character, I've decided how it's going to move. How do I actually make those motions translate into the digital world? You have people who are actually moving those characters around and you know, creating a library of motion that we use to simulate our stuff. And now you also have dedicated people like Forrest who are just doing lighting, right? Who are basically saying, we have this beautiful three-dimensional world. How do we communicate to the viewer our intent? So much of that intent comes through how a scene is illuminated and the tone and the mood that comes along with that. So you've got people who are just moving virtual lights in 3D space and creating that atmosphere and sensibility. And then you have a highly technical side, people like myself who are biased towards kind of a blend of artists and mathematicians, people who are making visual effects, explosions and muzzle flashes and, you know, water splashes and all these kind of things that are interactive in a way where you touch the world and you get a little bit of response from that world. And then you've got people who are the glue in between, people who we would consider technical artists, people who understand what the code is and what the rendering is and how computers work, and they're acting as a bridge between the artists and the programmers basically, and writing tools, writing behaviors, making what we call shaders, which is basically math in visual form. So it's incredibly broad, and to say nothing of two-dimensional art. You've got graphic designers who are doing user interface work, you know, basically defining how players interact with the menus or the in-world experiences that you have. I guess the reason I'm rambling about this a little bit right at the beginning is that it means there's a lot of coverage in what it means to be a game artist now, way more than ever before. And so if you're somebody who isn't sure whether you or not you have the kind of skills to apply to the game industry, in 2022, chances are you probably do. Whereas 20 years ago, maybe that wasn't true. Maybe it was a little bit more difficult or specific.
Yeah, that's so true. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he said it all. By the way, I'm at Lost Boys. I forgot to mention that in the intro. I've been there about 6 months and it's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, I mean, it's great. When I first started at Tiburon, I might be dating myself here, but I started there. It was, you were just an artist, right? Like you had either you made a stadium or you made the uniforms for the characters. And now it's so specialized and it's so broad at the same time, right? Like you're able to really get into a lot of different things. And it's amazing because if you're technically minded, right? Like kind of like with Wyeth, it's this huge, you know, vast sea that you can really get into. Shaders, you can get into all kinds of VFX, you can get all kinds of stuff. Or if you're more of like the sculptural type person, there's certainly that there too. So I think the assessment is right. It's very broad and you probably could fit in somewhere in the gaming industry. So it's an exciting time for sure.
So moving on to our next question. As somebody who is just getting started or wants to get started in the game industry, what are some key fundamentals that they should focus on to learn and demonstrate? And Forrest, since you've entered recently, what advice would you give to people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could say from the lighting side, and even if like you're getting into materials, knowing like PBR, like photo. I'm blanking right now. It's totally left me, but like knowing PBR lighting, physically based, yeah, rendering, and knowing how materials react to light, knowing the values they need to be, and like understanding those technicalities, as well as just like general like photography, like, you know, basics and fundamentals, because they apply directly over into games. So those were the things that like really like I really like put the time into early on, was understanding those basics, basic fundamentals, so then I could actually take them and start to make art with it, instead of just kind of throwing everything at the wall and hoping something would stick.
And Chris, as a seasoned vet, how would you respond to that question?
Well, I would say, obviously, since things are so much more specialized in the industry, there's so many different things you could do. But let's say, for example, it was you want to be like a character artist or something. I would say that like the tools nowadays make things much easier to get to a realistic effect, but that also raises the bar too. You have things that are more simulation based, like Marvelous Designer. So it's kind of like, which is the cloth sim. You're kind of hoping, you're kind of arranging things and you're expecting wrinkles to fall a little more realistically. But that said, I still think fundamentals in terms of some level of drawing or having some knowledge of human or animal anatomy and have a little bit of time with that definitely helps, because it helps you communicate ideas quickly. And two, if you have a good grounding of what something's supposed to look like, it's a little easier to bend and caricature things to your will if you want to express something that, maybe you're not making let's say a wolf. You're making a wolf that is supposed to exude a type of quality visually that it might be a vulnerable, or it might be something majestic looking, or it might be wicked. So drawing and kind of paying attention to those things and studying those foibles, especially from life, kind of help you add those things into the mix and keep it from looking like a simulation. So I would say looking toward classical work. And in fact, one thing I kind of noticed over the years, and you can kind of see it on the forums, which is great, because our station or ZBrush Central is great to see what some really great student work and professional work is coming out these days. But one thing I noticed with a lot of student work coming out of China is a lot of them are studying old masters work, and they're recreating it in ZBrush and rendering it. So they're doing that same thing. They're kind of getting the foundation of how to stage lighting and get these graceful poses and cloth and everything. And once you get that, you can kind of bend everything else to your will for different styles or whatever. That'd be my advice.
Do you mind if I chime in on that just very briefly?
Please.
I just wanted to also say too, I couldn't agree more with Chris, and the new world order of hey, there's a job for everything also means, hey, there's also a degree for everything, which is rarely beneficial to people who didn't start from a good place. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, which is that a lot of times you'll see these schools like, hey, there's a game development degree, learn everything you need to know to get into video games. And the big problem with those commonly is that they don't spend enough time on the fundamentals. And so form and color theory and shape language and drawing from life and being able to pick up a pen and do something meaningful, or study old photography and understand what it means to look through a lens, that's actually the evergreen skill that you can use for the entirety of your career as an artist making digital art. And the tools, I'll teach you a tool in 3 months. I'm not worried if you have every little piece of any given digital capability. That stuff's the easy part. But if you don't have good taste, man, it's real hard. So if you're looking towards trying to get in, showing the ability to have awesome fundamentals and then proving that you can take a little piece of the game development pie and do it well, that's way better than the alternative where you're touching every little piece of the game development world experimenting. And over here, you took one life drawing class once, that you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I just wanted to kind of chime in on that one.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point that Chris and Wyeth make is I've seen a lot of people come through. Sorry, Nina, I know I'm jumping in. I'm not supposed to, but I feel like there's a huge emphasis on just getting a degree, right? Like just getting the piece of paper instead of really focusing on composition, color. And then you can even go down into like the modeling side of things, like poor UVs or poor baking habits, or understanding what's happening when you bake, understanding why you're making something the way that you're doing, beveling edges and making sure cages are set up for just all of that just seems to be it's been a run through of just get to the end of the program and get your piece of paper, where Wyeth was right. If you have somebody that has that really good solid foundation, all the other stuff will fall into place. But if you don't have that foundation, you're just building a house on quicksand, right? Like it's you can learn a tool, you can learn a process, right, through great documentation or a great mentor. But having that, understand, like, why are you making this way so it bakes correctly? Why are you making this so your normals come out looking great? And that's the basis for everything. You throw it in the painter, it uses all of those maps, right? We all know that. But not having that understanding, I see is something that is missing. And probably leads into our next question, actually, Nina.
It does, but I do want to say I love that you all are harping on this point to this degree, because I completely agree and I see it. And I also, for me, it breaks my heart to know that a lot of students go into incredible debt for these programs that just have a very high level general 3D, like Wyeth said, like one fundamental, figure drawing class or whatnot. Where when you actually get into the industry, like that, just like Brian said, building on quicksand, it's not really what gets you in the door and into an entry level position. It's really having those fundamental skills. So I love that you guys are all bringing that point home. So I'm going to shift the next question just a little bit, because it feels like we kind of covered the topic. But so outside of practical, technical, artistic skills, what are some things that maybe you don't quite learn in school that would be really helpful for somebody coming in the door in the game industry to understand and know and practice? Brian, I'm gonna put you on the spot.
No, that's great. That's a great question. I mean, honestly, you change the question, but it still kind of points back to it, right? Like, it's still having that basis and having that understanding is that fundamental is extremely important. But you can even go a step further and say something like, dirt tells a story, right? Like, looking at an asset from like an environment standpoint, looking at an asset, why does that thing move that way? Why does that edge get worn out? I mean, why would dirt collect there? Would water collect there? Not thinking of something like, I just have to get this asset done, but thinking of it narratively, right? Because even like, a cup or something can tell a story. Like, there's something that I saw in GTA 5 like forever ago, and I saw a video. Some guy was walking through a section of wherever they were, and there was a couple cups and like a wrapper of like a cheeseburger or something. Super small, super simple, but it's narratively there was something there, right? Like, thinking of things holistically, I think, is something that I love to see, and to me catches my attention when interviewing someone. If they have a sword, right, and like the handle is wooden and it's worn, and in the edges it's a little bit darker because maybe sweat or blood or whatever got there, right? Like, they're thinking of it like narratively, right? And that just adds. It's super small. Will some people notice it? Maybe not, but narratively, I think it's extremely important. That's what catches my attention, in addition to all of the basics, like the bakes and UVs and all that kind of stuff, and also having a true love of the craft, right? Like, going on ArtStation, looking at the pretty pictures and going, why is that awesome? And trying to figure that out, and then gut check yourself and say, does my stuff look like that, right? Like, am I at that level? And really pushing yourself, I think, is extremely attractive and helpful for getting a job.
Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, always, to Brian's point, like, telling a story. I mean, you can kind of infuse that in any part of like a prop or an environment or a character's clothing or something to that effect. So yeah, I think that's great. The other thing too that I would recommend, in what I try to do as much as I can. A little harder with everybody seeing the same thing on Google and everything, but if you can, kind of try to draw from sources that might not be as common. So there might be something that is still considered underground in fashion, or there might be something that you saw in some reference book or whatever. Like, there's a character that I made a while back. Supposed to be African American, and there was a hairstyle that was kind of proposed, and it was kind of like an afro. I was like, well, that's cool, but I saw somebody in Newark, New Jersey, that kind of had this hairstyle, a certain hairstyle, and it kind of stood out, and I had never seen it before in a game. Why don't we try that? So just little things, picking up a little things like that, kind of puts more view in the work. And you know, you can have work that shows I can work within the system, and then there's other stuff where it's like, here's a little bit of me in there with hopefully like the same level of quality and attention to it. So that's what I would say. Try to add a little bit of a twist in what you're doing.
I have to chime in on this one if you don't mind. I think these are great. I wanted to say one other thing too, because it relates exactly to this concept, and I love the idea of put a little storytelling into everything you make, because it is what makes it special. But it leads me to a point I wanted to make about originality. And it's interesting, after seeing so many portfolios, and we do a portfolio review for students every year at this conference, and hours and hours and hours of portfolios. One thing that comes up over and over again is junior artists, people who are just getting into the industry or people who are just finding their legs. They're inventing too much too soon, which sounds strange at first blush, but let me explain why it seems this way. Is that a lot of times someone's like, I want to make a character, right? And instead of finding some great reference, something that's either from real life or from an illustration or a movie they love, or something that they can emulate and prove to themselves that they can hit a perfect reproduction or a perfect level of fidelity, they go and they kind of invent their own thing without fundamentals, without drawing skills, without the bones of understanding why you would even put something here instead of here and why that matters. And they put these things in their portfolio that are kind of fundamentally a little broken from the beginning. And it takes a lot of capability to be able to truly invent, and it takes a lot of experience to truly invent. So if you're junior, if you're just starting and you're trying to build a portfolio, I often recommend don't try to go too deep down the invention rabbit hole. Find something that's really well established, that you love, that's beautiful. You could put a twist on it, or you could alter it to make it yours. But having good bones in your portfolio that comes from a good place means that when you make the thing, you're not emulating the house of cards that we were talking about earlier. And that will probably lead to a stronger portfolio, because somebody has done the hard work of invention for you, so you can prove the other stuff. And over time, you'll get to Chris's level where he can just close his eyes and amazing things happen. But like in the beginning, it's good to have an anchor, right? So I just kind of want to throw that out there.
I'd love to really quickly add on to that, just since I literally just came out of that world. Doing it the right way when you start learning feels so hard, because you're like, how does this work? Why isn't it doing what I want? And then you're like, you know what? If I just throw in a like really red volumetric light in front of everything, it's beautiful. And it's not, but like to you, you're like, yeah, look at that. It looks cool and different, and it's me. And then you start getting the feedback, hopefully, which everyone should. And then you start to unpack, oh, actually, this is hot trash. And you know, what I really need to do is go back to those fundamentals. And everyone struggles with it. I'm part of a community where like students come through all the time, and they always post work, and sometimes they get feedback they don't know exactly how to respond to. They'll do something completely radically different, and you're like, well, this has gone further away. And you know, so like I've been in those shoes, and I bet everyone here has, and I think that was, it's very valuable advice coming from you.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was excellent advice. So let's shift now to tools. Like, what are some specific resources and tools you would recommend, even tutorials, websites, for people who are just starting out? Why?
Yeah, I mean, most portfolios in this day and age have kind of moved to ArtStation. It's kind of become the industry standard now. And that's a real blessing for people, because portfolios are hard to get right. And the presentation of them, what you include, what you edit out of them, and we'll get to editing, I'm sure later, all of us will have a million thoughts on that. But ArtStation is a resource to just say, you know what, I have a basic portfolio that I want to get out there into the world. There's a framework in there that works. And so that's a huge thing to, you know, and not only that, but the amount of inspiring art there is unbelievable in those tutorials and all these other things. So from a, hey, I want to make a portfolio perspective, I think ArtStation is great. You know, you've got obviously classical art resources like, hey, I want to learn how to draw. The universe is full of stuff like that. When it comes to game technology, there are a couple of big players in the engine space. I'm biased because I work at Epic, so I think Unreal Engine is a great option. There are other great options too to make sure your work gets into a actual real-time rendered environment so that you can show it. There are very few game jobs in which it's valuable to show any of your work outside of the context of the technology that you're trying to get a job doing. So if you are a talented concept artist or something, maybe that's okay, and you can just show paintings and things. But for pretty much everyone else, you have to have good taste and make the digital art, and then you have to bring it into the place that is going to be rendered. And so in my case, it would be Unreal Engine. And you would build those assets and show them off in a beautiful way. And that's what goes into your portfolio. And so, you know, there are a million resources on how to learn all these tools. And that's, you know, that YouTube is an incredible place. ArtStation has a million tutorials. There are amazing forums like Polycount where there are like-minded game artists who share and critique each other. And you can make partnerships with people who you trust to give feedback on your work, and all that's really valuable. So I would say that's kind of a little piece of the ecosystem. And then of course, any individual specialization, there's going to be bespoke 3D software around that specialization, which is not the engine. So if you're a character sculptor like Chris, you're going to probably doing a lot of work in ZBrush or other packages. And so these are all pieces of software that you kind of have to learn in order to be able to make relevant game art.
Forrest, what would you say in terms of recommendations for beginners?
I think YouTube is definitely huge, and especially like if you're like me and you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do, just like start searching like what is an environment artist, what is a lighting artist, and there's just a plethora of resources available. Like I found an amazing hour-long talk with Boone Cotter from Naughty Dog talking about lighting, which was kind of like the final decider for me to move into it. One that's not necessarily artistic, but like networking. LinkedIn is huge. That helped me so much in the beginning, starting to reach out to studios and people in those disciplines whose work I admired. You know, connecting, sending a nice message saying your work's inspired me, and if you are ever willing to give feedback, you know, and you of course get a lot of non-answers or people saying I just don't have the time. But like I now have friends, you know, who I'm connected with at Insomniac and Naughty Dog and places from those initial reach outs and from them giving me, you know, advice and mentorship just through that. So I'd say really LinkedIn is, and just like leveraging that that social network is huge.
That's really nice that people were helping you out through LinkedIn. I do want to, like, I gotta throw it in because I know we all get it. If you're gonna reach out to someone on LinkedIn, like, please write an actual message and not,
Yes.
I would like to connect with you on LinkedIn, because nobody responds to that. So I actually want to ask this to all of our panelists because I think it's a great question. How did you choose your specialization, your craft in a game career? So let's stick with Forrest.
So hilariously, it was on LinkedIn. I reached out to Eric Pangilinan from Naughty Dog, and he told, like I gave him my background. I told him I was a filmmaker. I was kind of not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to get into games, and he told me, just like you all said earlier, the roles are so analogous between film and games now. Pick something that I really enjoy from filmmaking. And I really am partial towards cinematography, and lighting has so much to do with cinematography. So that was what really pushed me. And then starting to do the research and listening to podcasts, and that's really how I got my start in the specialty.
How about you, Brian?
So I kind of touched on it earlier, but the town that I grew up in, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for like 3D modeling or anything. And so after I went to school, I moved back there and I had to get into military contracting, just doing, just different graphics and things like that. And a friend of mine came up to me and was like, hey, you can change the textures on Doom, because I was at lunch, I was playing Doom, not on the clock, everybody relax. And so I was playing Doom. He was like, you can change the textures and you can put your face on the characters. And I was like, oh, get out of here. And he showed me how to do it. And I was like, wait, that's amazing. And then a whole new world opened up to me. And I was like, I can, like, this has got to be a job for somebody, right? And then after some research and just finding out, it's like, wow, you can do this for a living. So I applied all over the place and I ended up getting in at Tiburon. And so back then there were no environment artists. It was just, you just made stadiums or you made, the textures for characters for the teams. So I got to making stadiums. And then I realized, we can, even with a stadium, you can start to tell narrative like in concrete, right? Like on scoreboards, on weathering and everything. And I just kind of fell in love with the environment artist role because of that narrative approach that I could take. I also liked the bite-sized chunks of environment art, right? I could make a sword or a scoreboard or whatever it was, and that would contribute to the entire narrative of the game. So it just kind of evolved that way. I dipped into a little bit into character art, but I've always gotten pulled back to environment art. So for me, the narrative overall picture was always more attractive to me than anything.
Chris.
Well, I initially, my goal in college was to be in feature animation, and that was like the late 90s. And so I was interning at Walt Disney, and I was preparing to go there, but I had the worst timing for that because that was pretty much the end of 2D animation. They had this big studio that they were going to build with 700 people in down Orlando, and they said, we're just going to leave that building empty. We're just going to move on to something else and go with 3D. So for me, going to games was kind of like a fallback. But I enjoyed games. I've always been a gamer. I just didn't know exactly how to get into it. So luckily, I found Red Storm Entertainment, which wound up becoming Ubisoft, or part of Ubisoft. So I was able to start as a character artist there. And the thing that I've always loved about that is, kind of making something that you can kind of breathe some life into, quote unquote. You can kind of put a little bit of personality into it, especially earlier, I think, in the industry, let's say like the 2000s or something like that. You can play things a little more fast and loose, and that would remember, you can kind of add a little bit of things in there that perhaps weren't approved or not, but that's how I got my start there. It's been fun ever since.
And why?
Yeah, my origin story is interesting, but also not necessarily relevant to somebody who wants to pick a specialty. So maybe I'll just say that when I got in finally and got to my first industry job, I was basically seated in between an incredibly talented artist and an amazing programmer. And I literally sat in a chair in a trio of three between both worlds. And it's no surprise that I became a technical artist, because it's literally just being fed aesthetic and good taste from one side and being fed technical issues like how does a graphics processing unit work and how do computers work and how do I make technical things. And so, I kind of found my way to my current specialization by osmosis, I guess would be probably the best way for me to describe it. What's interesting is that now, though, those paths are much more defined, and they also look a lot more like the way you would take that path if you were going to be a traditional artist, and the way that you would take that path if you wanted to, say, make feature film animation. All of them are all now kind of running a little bit more parallel to each other, which is kind of cool. And so the resources that make you good at any one of those things are much more likely to make you good at others, which is why you're seeing this huge now exodus from film into game development, or maybe even some people that are moving the other direction, is because you're starting to see more of an interchange from a capability standpoint. So it's kind of neat.
So is it necessary to learn a programming language to work as an artist, whether it be environment, game, or concept or lighting. Forrest, what do you think about that?
For me, I haven't had to. I know that if like technical lighting artists would definitely, that'd be much more something that they would need to know for like building the tools like that translate between the engine and the artist, like Wyeth was talking about. Is it super beneficial? Yeah, I think so. And it's something that I've been trying to do in my free time. But at least as far as like the project that I'm on and using Unreal Engine, I haven't had to do any code. I've done visual code to like blueprints, but that's about where it stopped for me.
Chris, what's your experience been?
Well, it's not necessary, but it does help. I've never been much of a coding guy, but I have observed how when you would see like artists that had an artistic eye and had the technical feel, like in Wyatt's case, for example, you can make tools, and they don't even have to be super complex, but all they have to do is just reduce the clicks. Like there could be something that you have to do that takes 10 clicks to do. It could be something where it's like an export, or it could be something that weights normals on a model or something like that. And if you can get that to where it's a one-click operation, I mean, you save time and money for a lot of people. So there's value in it, definitely, if you have the mindset for it.
I think that's pretty much how I built my whole career, is reducing the number of clicks for people.
That's it. That's the key.
I can't tell you how many times a TA has saved our lives, it felt like, just because it's like they walk up, they're like, hey, what's going on? You're like, man, I keep having to do this X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh yeah, I can write a script for that. You're like, you can write a script. Yeah, I can do that. I'm like, oh my God. And they come back and it's like this beautiful script that just does it for you. You're like, oh, thank you so much. So TAs are unicorns and they're fantastic. Love them.
I'll also say there are jobs now. There are a lot of available game industry jobs, which is great. There are categories, however, which are a lot easier to get into than others. Everyone and their mom wants to be a character artist, and it is pretty challenging to compete at that level. You need to be pretty awesome and have incredible fundamentals and the capability to make three-dimensional art to a high standard and even higher every day. That's really competitive. The areas that are less competitive and might be more available to people who are junior and trying to get in are these areas that are a little bit of a gray area between having good taste and being somewhat technical. And you don't have to be highly technical necessarily to get jobs like that. And you don't have to be like, yep, I have a math degree and I've studied programming at Stanford and now I make 3D. Like, you don't have to be that person. But there are these gray area things, like, for example, visual effects, or what we would call shader artists, which make materials, but they make them react in a way that is kind of driven by visual programming. That's a big thing. Or even artists like UI and UX artists, who you need a little bit maybe of scripting capability to make it's almost like building a website. Like, what happens when I click? What happens when I don't? Do I have a good sensibility for what would be sensible for the end user? These are some of these roles are in this slightly gray zone of needing a little bit more technical capability than just being a pure artist. But the chance of getting into the industry goes up a lot. And I always tell people, like, you want a guaranteed job in a year, go make visual effects for a year and get a simple portfolio. Because I promise you, if you are even acceptable at that job, somebody will pay you probably a catastrophic amount of money to do it.
Agreed.
And it's just remarkable. There are certain categories that are very underfed, and Forrest, the world that Forrest lives in too, that's one of these new emergent ones, especially somebody, like you said, that's slightly more technical, that also has a great lighting and cinematic eye. That's somebody that you're always going to be able to find a place for. So yeah.
Gosh, that's so fascinating. Yeah, you're totally right. VFX, UI, like, these are like disciplines that we're always looking for people who are specialized in that. One other area that's up and coming that we are always on the search for is procedural artists. So people who can wrangle programs like Houdini to procedurally pump out content is becoming really important for our development. And again, one of those like really sort of niche, kind of technical, kind of artistic disciplines that I don't know, it's a great thing to get under your belt if you're looking for something to study. So I feel like this moment has led up for Wyeth to shine. What are employers and managers looking for in an artist's portfolio or demo reel? So what sets an applicant apart from the others?
Yeah,
Why?
I mean, all of us could talk for an hour just on this question. So I'll say a tiny two pieces and then pass it off. The two pieces would be, one is a pattern that we see, which is junior portfolios have too much stuff in them. And it's pretty much a universal constant, but you do not have to have a lot of work in order to prove that you're good at something. And your portfolio will only be as good as the worst thing in it. And so oftentimes you get handed a portfolio or somebody sends you your digital one and you've got your big, beautiful beauty shot that they spent 6 months on at the top. And the first thing that all of us do is just scroll to the bottom and look at the one they're trying to hide and hope we don't stare at. And that's the one upon which all things in the portfolio are judged, because consistency is such a key aspect of hiring somebody, especially junior. You want them to have 3 amazing things that they did beautifully from start to finish, instead of 10 mediocre ones or 1 amazing one and 9 that are kind of like, you know, because you start to question, like, does this person have good taste, or did they just get good advice on this one, or did they spend enough time in iteration, or did they get lucky? These are questions you start to ask yourself as a hiring manager. So that's, you know, that's kind of one comment, I guess. And then the other thing would be is that you're making game art. So unless you're a concept artist or an illustrator, you really need to show your work in situ, in the context of the game engine, the final result, the thing that you're going to see, the pixels on the computer. You have to have proved all the way through the pipeline that you can make the thing. And if your portfolio is not predominantly that type of presentation with some other supporting cast of characters to show your thought process and other work you did, that's going to be problematic. So I have 50 other things I can say, but I'd love to pass it off to get some more thoughts.
Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, Wyeth said it all. But I mean, even on top of that, we touched on it earlier, having those fundamentals. Whenever I get a portfolio in, not only do I look at the pieces and kind of, you know, I go to the very bottom to see what are they trying to bury and hide, but I want to see clean bakes. I want to see the fundamentals. I want to see, are meshes overly complicated? Are, you know, do they make sense, right? Again, dirt tells a story. Are you just throwing just old machinery on it from Painter? Are you actually painting things in? Are you, you know, really narratively trying to lean into the piece? You know, I have a saying, or a couple sayings. One of them is know thine tool set, know your tool set, know what your tool set can do, and do it, exploit it, use it, right? And then having asset awareness, knowing what that asset is going to be used for, right? Now, of course, in a portfolio, it may be just a fire hydrant, right? So there's that, but you can still know what that's going to be used for. Is it going to be destroyed? Is it going to be in a cinematic? Is it going to be, you know, is it going to be 5 blocks away? It doesn't need to be 8,000 tries if it's 5 blocks away, right? Like, you know, is it going on to Switch? Is it going on to PC? Like, just understanding the full breadth of what it is that you're making is extremely important. And just really leaning into your craft, really, you know, there's the individuals that, you know, and everybody has a life, and I get it, but, you know, they do their 40 hours, but after that, are they doing something? Are they pushing themselves, right? Are they getting into something that's a little bit more, you know, that kind of pushes them maybe into a little bit of a coding or something? That would be more for the interview process. But as in terms of portfolio, you know, Wyeth is right. Keep it focused. Keep it really good, right? This is your best stuff. You are trying to attract the attention of an employer, right? It's not just a spam. You're not just throwing out everything that you've ever made and ever touched. Be real with yourself. Give yourself a good gut check. Go on ArtStation. What looks beautiful? Is your stuff that beautiful, right? Push yourself, challenge yourself.
I'd love to add on to that
Oh,
real quick.
yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No,
No, go ahead.
I'd say feedback, especially as you're starting, is very important. Like, so send your portfolio and the pieces off to people like whose opinions you trust, and make sure that the pieces are reading well to other people. And it goes back to also those fundamentals that we've all been talking about, is make sure all the fundamentals are on display in all the pieces. And a lot of the ones that are like at the bottom are probably the ones where the fundamentals aren't there. They've been kind of kicked out, but you don't want to get rid of them because you worked so hard on it. But sometimes you have to kill your darlings.
It's a good point. You also, none of us are really capable of judging our own work, particularly when you get a little better at it over time, but you only get, frankly, marginally better at it, even with a lot of experience. And so getting feedback is good. I will also say a pattern that we see a lot is, especially with people who are kind of going through these game development mill programs that don't have good fundamentals, is you got everybody getting feedback from each other in the room, but nobody's the expert. And so everybody's just, providing bad feedback to each other, frankly. And instead, you want to seek out people who are already doing that job successfully and at a high level, and do your best to get feedback from them. And sometimes you can do that through these public forums that have a lot of veterans on them that are communicating, or reach out to people that you trust on Twitter and see if they'll chime in, or there are ways to do that. And you might have to, like Forrest, I'm really inspired by your story of just reaching out to people until you built a network. I think that's great. And that you found a way to get feedback, right? Meaningful feedback from people. But yeah, you got to make sure it's coming from the right source. Some random on Twitter shouldn't be telling you if your art's good. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, if everyone's sending clapping emojis, you've done something wrong.
Yeah. Plus, what I'd like to chime in on this also. Yeah, like one thing that, to everyone's point, that a lot of students do is that they internalize their work, like it's personal to them, so it means something. So sometimes, like, the defense of not throwing out the weakest stuff is like, hey, I want to show the progression. This is where I was here, and this is where I was there. But you don't want to give anyone the wrong impression that this is indicative of the work that they can expect if you get hired. The progression stuff also counts too. So you definitely don't want to do that. And one thing that some artists have been doing, kind of, it's kind of like a side thing. I thought that was really cool to do. Sometimes they'll do like a little Gumroad, or they'll do a 4 or 6 week course. So you could be someone who is a marvelous designer expert. You do cloth all day. You work at some big studio. You could have a course and you kind of advertise it maybe on ZBrush Central or wherever, or Polycount or Facebook. It's like, hey, I've got 20 slots open for 20 artists, X amount of dollars. And you're going to be learning directly from somebody that's doing it right now. Like, there's a guy, Facebook friend I know that does it as well. He might still be doing it, so you might want to look at Geo Napkill, but he worked on the Hulk for the Avengers, right? So there's a lot of gravitas in that where he says, hey, I have a class, or I can help you learn how to sculpt for 6 weeks, 20 slots, you will learn how, and that, so far, as from what I've seen, has yielded really tangible benefits for people. So there's a few avenues for that, but I'd recommend that as well.
And sort of staying on the portfolio note, do you think it's better to have a more specific work on your portfolio, or to keep things general?
Well, I guess to me, that's kind of dependent on time. I think most of the folks on the panel, we're probably coming from turn of the century, right? Where it's like generalist stuff, and do a little bit of texture, and I do a little bit of this and do a little of that. If I was a student, had a limited amount of time to do all this stuff, I'd probably make like maybe three models. Maybe one is a full model and 2 are really good busts that I can kind of show with that bust, that I can do hair or do hard surface as well as do organics. And maybe that'll be enough to get the conversation going. And maybe I get an art test for it, but I would kind of look at it that way. It's like, how can I kind of get the conversation going, making this impression good enough so that people will be like, I think he could do it. Let's give him an art test and see where it goes from it. That'll be my advice.
Wyeth, what do you think?
Well,
Specific versus generalized.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I think in this day and age, you're probably better served focusing on something and doing it well. Because it's hard to be a generalist that has the capability to do all the things at an apex level. I don't know that many right now. There are a couple, and they are freaks, and I am very impressed by them. But it's pretty rare. And I think in this, especially if you're junior, it's better to have a narrower focus and push your fidelity to a higher level to prove that you can do that thing. And then over time, through osmosis or through passion and learning, you start to widen out your capabilities a little bit, and you become more broad. And maybe you're a modeler who also does their own textures and writes their own shaders and that kind of stuff, right? But in the beginning, I think keep it narrow, keep it focused. It's also good to remember that you're applying to a company. That company has a particular aesthetic. They have a particular taste, they have a particular tone, they're looking for a particular thing. A no isn't necessarily no forever, it's just no, not right now, or no under these specific considerations upon which we are hiring. And so if it's one thing to say, I love Blizzard, I need to sit next to Chris and make, Blizzard
Elves and trolls.
and then to tailor your whole portfolio to that, you can do that, and I'm sure there are lots of people that do that, and that's probably a great way to get hired at Blizzard. But every company has their own sensibility, so know what you're good at, and if you're great at stylized art, you shouldn't just be hammering your portfolio at everybody under the sun. You should find people who are going to respond to the work you do. But I would say keep it tight.
So to add on to that, like when we're right now, we're talking about like the main, like the initial portfolio review, which is happening through a recruiter. And a lot of times that recruiter might not like be super experienced in your particular field of art. They can look at something and go, that's good or that's bad. And so keeping it more focused will help with that as well. Because if your portfolio is like, well, I kind of want to do VFX and I kind of want to do lighting, and here's a smattering of them, like that recruiter's got like a minute before they're going to move on to the next person, because they've got to get through all these these applications. And so as clear as you can be about who you are, what makes you unique, and getting your work out there front and center, like the better.
Great. Well, that is all the prepped questions that we have. If anybody in any of our participants have questions, feel free to place them in the chat. If not, I've got a couple queued up for fun. All right, I'm gonna go for it. Oh, here we got one. Could you speak on getting into the game industry as a writer? Does anybody
Want me to take that
want
one?
Yeah, go for it.
One, so I'm not going to pretend to be the expert here, and there are people that can answer this far better than me, and I'm sure you can find a million of them, but I will say writing in context is a big part of the job. And so if you look at frameworks that allow you to write in context, and there's a common one that's very old now, but I'm going to reference it so you can understand kind of the trajectory of this from before. There's an old game called Neverwinter Nights. It's a role-playing game. And this role-playing game has a huge framework upon which you can build your own content into it. You can make your own adventures, like Dungeons and Dragons kind of. And I have seen successfully people who have written basically stories and campaigns inside of these existing frameworks that are already built. It's already a game, it already has needs, and then you can start to express, what does the character do? Who do you talk to? How do they communicate with each other? How do you build a story and a narrative? How do I communicate to a player, which is way different from communicating to a reader or a passive listener on audio or TV or film? And so finding an output where you can generate narrative written content in context of an already existing game ecosystem, that's the first order of business, because you basically have to prove that you can do it under those constraints, which are bizarre. game writing is a really, really weird thing because it's this staccato, player interrupted, half focused exercise in narration that's tricky. It's really, really, really tricky. And there are a lot of, it's not just writing a beautiful story. It's way more nuanced than that. So again, I wish I was more well-versed in it, but I do know that people have successfully found their way into the industry as a designer, game designer and writer by making modifications to existing things.
Okay. When you guys say junior, I'm thinking high school. What do you mean by junior?
I mean, to me, a junior artist is someone that has no experience, right? That is not in the game industry at all, or they're not even, like I have a situation where there's someone that's working in QA that is trying to get in to be a junior environment artist. So you don't have any experience in the industry. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because I've seen people that have some experience in the industry, but their skills aren't quite to the next level, right? They're, you know, we kind of have a metric that we go by here. It's like a roles matrix or whatever. And it's usually 0 to 3 years of game industry experience. You're still considered like a junior. You basically you're a little bit more dependent on your lead, right? Like you're kind of dictated best practices, you know what I mean? You're not really setting the way, you're not really defining pipelines or anything like that. You're very much being mentored by, say, a more senior person or your lead. You require typically some help to accomplish your work, right? Typically not quite as productive as a higher level person. It's not necessarily a negative. It's just you're learning, right? You're learning the process, you're learning workflows, you're learning all of that. And so that's how I see a junior. I don't know how the other panelists see it, but that's how I would define a junior.
I would agree with that. I think that's pretty relevant. I mean, like, I guess you could kind of say, well, how much hand-holding will be needed? And that kind of defines the level of experience. Because you could be coming from film, new to the game industry, but you know, you just need the general track, and you're not really junior on that part, but it's more of like the person, you know, potential. There's potential to this guy, or this lady, or whatever, and enthusiasm, and you kind of guide them to develop that. But some of the things that they might be doing might be something like exports or checking outsource assets, double checking them, making sure that everything is lined up, and maybe not giving feedback on aesthetics, but are the naming conventions correct, or is everything in folder? And then also in one other chunk of time, it might be, hey, let's work on this prop. You work on this like maybe half the day, and then the other half you're kind of giving that kind of technical feedback. So it all really depends. But I think the good thing about that path is you learn the process from the ground up. So you learn the right way to do it within that company structure.
I think another thing that you get like in those junior years, that maybe like if you're coming straight out of a program or you're coming straight out of a high school, is soft skills. And like those are things that you can't really jump into and just automatically have. And I say soft skills, those are like the non-technical skills, like, you know, ability to communicate, ability to like estimate time, you know, collaboration, like work ethic, holding yourself responsible to deadlines, or communicating if something's going to run late. And those are things that having someone like, you know, to kind of help guide you through that and teach you, like takes some time.
And if I could just add one more thing, one plus to like what you might find in recent graduates or you know, junior folks, is, like I said, a ton of enthusiasm. And the cool thing too is that a lot of times, I myself included, I kind of get a suite of tools that I like and I kind of stick to for a while. But younger folks will come in and they'll be like, hey, have you tried this one right here? You could do this step that you were taking 10 clicks to do with this new tool, with, let's say, Blender, for example. a lot of younger folks or people new to the industry are coming up using Blender, and it's really powerful. I still have to wrap my head around it, of course, but I still have to learn, but it's extremely powerful. So things like that, there's a direct benefit that folks like that bring to a company. They help keep you sharp and fresh on the latest tools.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think, when you think about a junior person, it's easy to think of them as just like, oh, it's like a lot of work to bring somebody, up into production, but they really do infuse like a level of energy, enthusiasm, and like you said, like a fresh look on the craft that it's just hard to get when you're in it all the time,
Absolutely.
right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think they definitely are a huge benefit too, especially like a team of seniors who's kind of rough around the edges and jaded and
Yes.
war
It happens.
torn.
It happens. Yeah, you need that fresh look, and that's what folks like that bring.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see, I think we're just about at time. Tiffany, should we move to some closing statements from everyone? Does that sound good?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, if you guys want to just give a little bookend to our time together. Forrest, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I think the main point that if for anyone to take out of it from like what I've said or kind of my story is just when you make the decision to get into games, there can be this feeling like, okay, there's this giant impenetrable castle that is the games industry. How do I get into it? And just like push past that like awkwardness or self-doubt and just start chipping away at through all the advice given here. Go to YouTube, go to LinkedIn, just start pushing yourself. There's so many free tools. Unreal Engine's free, Blender's free. Like they're just, it's such a great time to just push past those hesitations and self-doubt and take the first step.
Right.
Yeah, I guess all I'll say is don't hold anything too precious in the beginning. If you had a artist who was learning how to make pottery and you had two equivalent people and one of them spent a month perfecting a single pot and throwing it back on the wheel and nudging this and nudging that, coming back to it the next day, and then you put someone next to them and they just throw 3 pots a day and the quality be damned, I promise you that at the end of that month, that person is going to make a pot about 50 times better than the person who tried to take that one and noodle it and adjust it and tweak it and perfect it. So fail fast, make a bunch of stuff quickly, don't hold anything too precious or too dear, and just expose yourself to a bunch of stuff in this new weird digital world. And I think you'd be a lot better off.
That was a beautiful piece of advice. I love it. Chris.
I can't add much more to that. I thought that was really well done. Yeah, I mean, always consider yourself like a student. Like you always want to improve. So you always want to have like your cup open and available to learn new things. So try not to rest on your laurels. Remember why you love this, what you love about joining this industry, or why you want to be in this industry. Let that be the energy that you kind of use to push you forward to always improve. And yeah, keep an open mind.
That's great. Brian.
Man, how do you follow up all of that? Yeah, I mean, if you want something bad enough, you'll do anything for it. I encourage everyone just to get after it. Just really, look at what you're doing and really try to push yourself and be open. Exactly what Chris said. I've been doing this 23 years, right? And if I were to jump back into the environment artist pool, right, like I would have to brush up on some stuff. It moves fast. Like, on my off time, I try to do things even now, right? I'm a director, but I still try to model in my off time, right? So always just be pushing yourself and learning, and I know I said this 100 times, don't forget about the fundamentals. Please don't. Please just really lean into those, really lean into them. Be willing to just question yourself in terms of, am I doing the right thing? But then believe in yourself at the same time, right? That sounds counterintuitive, but just really trust your gut, push yourself, and really try to get the best fundamentals that you can and go after it. Exactly what Chris said. Don't forget why you're doing this. Like, right, don't forget that love. Don't lose that love.
Great. Thank you guys so much. It was so nice talking to you all, seeing Wyeth and Chris again, and meeting you, Brian and Forrest. Thank you, Tiffany, for hosting us in Triangle Artworks. This was fantastic.
Great.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I'd
Pleasure.
like to, yes, thank you so much. I'd like to thank our panelists and our moderator for joining us during their lunch hour and sharing their time and expertise with our Triangle Artworks community. It's really appreciated. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, we will be putting this out on our Artswell TV YouTube channel. So once that's published, I will email the notification to our participants and the panelists. And if you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, it's really the best way to keep in touch with what all we're doing and all of our programming. So I'll post that in the chat for our participants. And again, thank you everyone so much for being here this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
See
Thank
ya.
you.
It's been great.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.